Okay, our panel, Father Lubomir Zhybak. Father Zhybak is a native of the Ukraine. As a child, he worked on a dairy farm. As you know, Ukraine is a huge agricultural power. And instead of being a dairy farmer, somehow he decided to be a priest. Eventually pursued his education first in Ukraine, then the United States. He's been coming here, and finally in Rome. As you can see, he has the STL. That is a licentiate that he can teach theology of the Catholic Church. He has a Master of Arts and a BA, of course. He has served in very high posts in the official name Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. It's the largest Eastern Catholic Church in the world. He's been the personal secretary to their major archbishop, who would be a patriarch except for political reasons. And he's represented the Ukrainian Church at international conferences. Father Lubomir speaks 6 languages fluently: Ukrainian, English, German, Italian, Polish, and Russian, and he has a good working knowledge of Spanish and French. In 2006, he married Natalia Murtyuk, a native of Lviv. You've heard of Lviv, it's been bombed recently. Who is an instructor in YSU's English Language Institute, to the parents of 2 sons, Svatoslav, did I say that right, Father? And Julian, both born in Lviv. Family moved here in 2012. Father Lubomir and his wife, Natalia, they have family living through this war right now. Father Lubomir's mother is in their hometown in western Ukraine. And for Father Lubomir, obviously, this is more than an exercise or something to see on the news. It's deeply personal, as Father Tony alluded to, as those of us Lebanese during the Civil War. Some of us, like myself, we had family members killed. So we understand the concern. Okay. My friend, Lieutenant Colonel John R. Tiffany, United States Army, retired. He served as a strategic intelligence officer. His career spanned 1977 to 2000. He's done a lot of things for our country in the military. He's been a paratrooper, electronic warfare officer, manpower and personnel officer. He's also worked in the private sector for Hughes Aircraft and Raytheon Company. He's a scientist, a researcher, and an inventor. He's the holder of over 10 international and U.S. patents on technology for advanced weapons systems. After 23 years, he retired, I believe, in 2000. We all know what happened in 2001. He was called back to work with United States Special Operations Forces. As far as education, he has a BS in physical science from the University of Texas at El Paso on a 4-year ROTC scholarship. He's a working class guy like the rest of us. And he received the Army Top 5% Fellowship, where he earned his MA in Human Factors Engineering at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is less than 100 miles from here. Yeah. John was raised a Roman Catholic and is still a resolute Christian. I was checking him in church. He still knows how to make the sign of the cross. Now, you think that's interesting. Mr. Daniel Kovalik, JD, is our attorney, author, and activist. He's been a labor human rights lawyer since graduating from Columbia Law School. Yeah, the one in New York. He has represented plaintiffs in alien tort statutes, which I didn't know. I looked it up. This law has been on the books since 1798, where our country, whatever you want to say about it, realized that we can do damage sometimes to other people. And since 1798, people of other nations have been able to sue the United States for damage we have done. Very interesting. He is he's really an attorney who stands up for human rights, represents people being abused in countries like Colombia. He received the David W. Mills Mentoring Fellowship from Stanford Law School, and he's written extensively for the Huffington Post and Counterpunched. He's lectured all over the world. Since 2012, Dan has been teaching international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. He's the author of at least 6 books, some of which will be on sale tonight at the end of the program. That's why we had that round table set up back there. But Dan, people are eating on it now. Don't worry, we'll get it. Yeah, it's a good problem to have. Thank you for the turnout. Dan is a devout Catholic. Okay? So you could be left, you could be right. It doesn't matter. Our hearts find what they find. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, our responders. Every one of these responders I know personally, although I never had them in class. I was a history major along with English. They're the kind of people that made YSU what it is, and hopefully not what it was. As those of you who read the paper know, YSU is being diluted, and it's not fair, especially to people like Dr. George Beelen, Professor Emeritus, former longtime chairman of YSU's History Department. George has also been a politician, a good one. Elected 3 terms as Austintown Township trustee, right across the road. In 1976, he ran as a Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in the former 19th Congressional District. Had he won, I dare say our politics here in the Valley might have been much different. But it was not to be. Professionally, Dr. Beelen is an expert on the history of Mexico and Latin America. He is the leading authority on the complex ethnic mosaic of our Mahoning Valley. Those of you who used to attend Ohio Cultural Alliance know about the 30 years of fantastic programs George has put on. He's written one book, The Peopling of the Mahoning Valley, and he has another book coming out that will encompass all of the many wonderful programs over those 30 years of the Ohio Cultural Alliance. Dr. Beelen's been recognized several times as a YSU Distinguished Professor, and in 2006 he received the coveted YSU Heritage Award, recognizing his major, long-lasting contributions to the university. Thank you for being here, George. Okay, Dr. Jacob Ari Labendz is a friend of mine. He's somebody, once you get to know him, he's just an engaging person. And I'm so glad he agreed to be here tonight. He directs the Center for Judaic and Holocaust Studies at YSU, where he's also the Clayman Assistant Professor of History. Dr. Labendz's work has focused considerably on questions of national belonging in Cold War Central Europe, with a focus on Jewish history. Dr. Labendz himself is of Ukrainian descent through his mother, and unfortunately lost contact with those Ukrainian relatives during the Soviet period, where there was a lot of repression of a lot of people, most especially Jews, I would imagine. It's a shame when you're afraid to get on the phone and call your relatives because of what that could mean for you, because they're in America. Jacob, thanks for being here. On the end down here is Dr. Kieth Lepak. Started at YSU in 1988 and retired in 2019, and continues to teach a course or two as Associate Professor Emeritus of Politics and International Relations. He's taught courses in general politics, comparative European, Russian, and Chinese politics, international relations, and political thought. Special interest in programs of U.S. foreign policy and challenges facing contemporary democracy. He has a BA from Carroll College in Wisconsin in international relations and German. He spent his junior year at the University of Bonn, and he is fluent in German. He has an MA and a PhD in foreign affairs from the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. Anybody knows who established the University of Virginia? Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, right. He's taught at Vanderbilt, the Harvard of the South, James Madison University, and the University of Virginia. Research and writing focused on the politics of Eastern Europe and Germany and issues of U.S. foreign policy and military intervention. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Jamil Al-Wekhian. I'm sorry for pronouncing your name properly. Okay. No, I didn't cough there. Like my name should be Nakley, not Nakley, but that's all right. He teaches at Kent State University. Dr. Al-Wekhian began teaching at the KSU School of Peace and Conflict Studies in the fall of 2017. Previously, he taught for 5 years in the Department of Peace Studies at the University of Missouri, Columbia. He's also the founder and advisor for the Better Together Interfaith Organization at MU. Dr. Al-Wekhian was awarded the University of Missouri Columbia Excellent Teaching Award. Jamil was born in a remote village in Jordan, where he earned his BA in psychology from the University of Jordan and an MA in criminology from Mutah University. Very good. Dr. Wekhian holds a PhD in International Conflict and Management Studies from Kennesaw State University. His research focuses on culture, religion, and conflict management, as well as sports violence and identity-driven conflict. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wekhian, and you can, well, Jamil, you know what to do. Let me stop talking.
Good evening, everyone. Nakley. Thank you. And merci. By the way, you pronounced my name right, so Wekhian in Arabic, Wekhian in English. Again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. So the order will be starting actually with this table here. We have 3 panelists. Each of them will be given 10 minutes to give an opening statement. We'll start first with Father Lubomir, Zhybak. And then second will be with Colonel Tiffany. And third will be with Attorney Kovalik, right? I hope I pronounced names good, right? Thank you. Then we will move or switch to responders table here. We will have, or each responder will be given the opportunity to ask 1 question and 1 follow-up question for each panelist. We'll start with Dr. George Beelen, and then with Dr. Jacob Labendz, and then Dr. Lepak, right? Thank you. It's yours, Father, please. So if you want, you can use this one, or if you want to come up here, you're welcome. Whatever you want.
I don't know.
Feel free. And by the way, I will have, just as a reminder for the time, 5 minutes and 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, either in Arabic or American. Is this working? Everybody can hear me? Closer, okay. Problems with mic. Stand up, okay. Is this better? There you go. Thank you very much for having me. It is truly my honor to be here during these difficult times for my native land, for my homeland of Ukraine. A Ukrainian went to pray to church, saying, Lord, please, 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 lead all Russian people to heaven, but could you please do it now? Unfortunately, my friends, this is not what the Ukrainians are praying for right now. Seeing the women and the children in the cold basements, hearing about people taking water from the puddles outside because there is no other water. Seeing and hearing people burying their loved ones in these mass graves without any proper funerals or any dignified manner. Of course, all of this cannot evoke anything positive, unfortunately. It is particularly sad, of course, that you see little children drawing pictures of assassination of Vladimir Putin. This is how grave and serious the situation is. Surely, we can stand or sit and talk here the whole night about, theoretical ways of how we can stop this war and how it could have never started, etc., etc., etc. But just place yourself for a second. Place yourself for a second in the shoes of all of the suffering brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And I'm sure your perspective will change immediately. You see, my friends, we do not choose where we are born. You did not choose to have been born in the United States or wherever else. I did not choose to have been born in Ukraine. As far as I'm concerned, I speak through the prism of my faith, it is a gift of God, no matter where we are born. There is nothing we do or did not do that makes us born whatever country. It is a grace of God. It is something that I guess we all take for granted. I'm sure all of you are proud Americans. I am proud Ukrainian. I love my native land just as you love America. And I love this land as well. By the way, I've been living here for about 10 years. But what does it say to us? It speaks to us about one common thing. Need for solidarity. Human solidarity. Because we do not choose where we are born, we need to realize that we are part of one human family. Now, of course, I'm not a politician, as it is obvious. No aspirations to be one either. So I will speak as a Catholic priest. And allow me to read, before I go any further, and I'm going to be short. I don't want to take anybody's time. Allow me to read a passage from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 8, verses 34 through 37. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." See, my friends, we have a man in the Kremlin who presents himself as a Christian. Not only as a Christian, he presents himself as, to me, as a fellow Eastern Christian, being a Russian Orthodox. There's also another man by the name of Patriarch Kirill, who likewise is a Christian, who leads the church of millions of people. So, my friends, without passing any judgment, without being judgmental, and please correct me if I'm wrong, here's the question, the dilemma I have. What is Vladimir Putin and Patriarch Kirill, who completely agrees with the atrocities that are being done, with the murders being committed, with the civilians being killed, innocent children being murdered? What is this politician and a spiritual leader try to accomplish? You see, we Christians, we view life in the eschatological manner. This is not it for us, this earthly existence. We look far, far away, so far away, we look into eternity. And so my question is, as a fellow Christian of Vladimir Putin and Patriarch Kirill, is, my brothers in faith, what are you trying to accomplish by this? It's not only that you are putting in peril your own souls, but you are causing all of this suffering, all of this pain. For what purpose? For the idea of some kind of Ruski Mir, Russian world, that will end with the moment of your death? What in the world are you trying to accomplish? Because think for a moment, if Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church had courage to speak up the truth, not to follow the line of the Russian government, this war could have never started. There could have not been any of these atrocities committed. Because he is the moral authority in Russia, after all, isn't he? If he had the courage to say to Vladimir Putin and his circles, stop this madness, what are you doing? But no. He decided to side with him, to side with the madness of this war that ideologically they already lost. There is no way that this relationship, unfortunately right now, will be rebuilt in a month, in 2 months, even in a century. Instead of pouring oil on the wound, they poured acid, a lot of acid. And so my question still remains, my friends. What are two Orthodox Christians claim to believe in the same God as I do? What are they trying to accomplish by killing their fellow Christians?
I'm an intelligence guy, right? I used to watch the bad guys in Europe. I worked on both sides of the wall. I got to know the Soviets very well, the East Germans very well, Czechoslovakians. And I got to know the people of 16 different military districts. And I'd make assessments 4 days out of the week and tell the Deputy Chief of Staff Intelligence if we were going to go to war, or what their capabilities were, what their plans were. Almost every time I said they cannot attack. They just cannot, because they would run out of fuel. They'd run out of food. Their people don't want to do it anyway. And I think the situation is very similar today with what we're seeing here. The dogma was that the Russians or the Soviets would roll over the border and conquer Europe within just a few days. I think we found something similar happening here. It just didn't work the way they planned it. But we did see they ran out of food, they ran out of fuel, they ran out of POL, petroleum oil, lubricants, and the soldiers' morale is very, very low. But as an intelligence analyst, let me show you what I understand, okay? This is what I was asked to do, to talk a little bit about these topics. I don't know where the Ukrainian forces are, the Ukrainian ground forces are. The reason I put this chart up is because I want you to see that there aren't a whole lot of them. I think they have 7 maneuver brigades and 1 anti-aircraft regiment, that's it. Some reserve forces and some people who have been called to service who are not really professional soldiers. I'm putting this up to tell you that they are outnumbered at least 5 to 1 by the Russians who are in country right now. It doesn't look like they have much of a chance, but they're doing quite well, surprisingly well. The history of Ukraine, I'm not an expert on it. Suffice it to say they've got enemies in every direction over time, and friends in every direction over time also. But more recently, some of you were around when the wall came down. I think it was November 9th, it was a Thursday, 1989. And in 1990, Ukraine declared independence. Then they declared independence again in 1991. Then there was some influence on the interior of Ukraine by Russia for a while, and they got kicked out in 2014. 2014 is also the year when Crimea was taken by the Russians and some of eastern Ukraine. Then more recently, an actor, comedian, was elected to be president of Ukraine. He's done a surprisingly good job, hasn't he? I think so, although there's some criticism of him we'll get to later. In April, the Russians started putting troops along the border, claiming it was an exercise. In January, the Russians promised we will not invade. In February, they invaded, okay? And we have been watching it on the news ever since unfolding. I don't know where you get your news. Mine could all be false. Almost everything you see on TV is wrong, right? But I go to BBC and sometimes that's correct. So if I'm telling you anything here, it's based on things that could be absolutely false, but I'm doing the best I can to dig facts out of the stuff that we get online and on the air. What does the Ukraine have going for it? They've got a visible national leader. They can move around inside the country. They know the territory, and they don't quit. They have an attitude that they're going to fight for every inch of their land. Their weaknesses are they're getting tired. There are only so many of them. They're running out of a lot of things that they need. They have problems sometimes with food and fuel and ammunition. They're grossly outnumbered. And inside Ukraine, there are some competing factions that oppose the president himself. He wasn't always the most popular guy, and there were people inside Ukraine who actually called for his assassination. Opportunities are, they've got world opinion on their side, this is true. They have a lot of international support. And the Russian and Belarus supply lines are in fighter range, in missile range of Ukraine. So they could, in theory, be attacked, and they have been a little bit, but not a lot. Threats to them are the Belarus military could attack. I think they've already crossed the border. They say they have not, but they could. There are more mercenaries being hired in North Africa and in Syria for a very small amount of money, because if you've been there, you know how poor some people are. They'll do anything for a few $1,000s for their family. But they're being trained just a little bit and then sent into Ukraine. And then there's an NBC threat. NBC is nuclear, biological, chemical, that the Russians do have. They've got a great capability. Wild card is China. China can supply money. China can supply material. They could even supply troops, although, as far as I know, they haven't done this. Here's where you can find most of the Soviet or Russian troops most of the time. Look how far away the Eastern Military District is, right? They're represented inside Ukraine right now. They've got one army from the Eastern Military District. You would have thought that the Southern Military District, if fully manned up, could have rolled over Ukraine in a matter of days. They're present. So is the Central Military District and the Western Military District. Here are the units that I've identified as being present in Ukraine right now. I identified them by the deaths of their commanders that are reported on the news. And you can look up almost any one of those Russian commanders and find out what their unit is, their associated unit. From the Eastern Military District, we actually have the 29th Combined Arms Army along their western border inside Ukraine. So the Central Military District is holding the northern front. The Western Military District, which all of us know if you've ever worked along, well, during the Cold War period, very historic units, they're holding along the western front. Southern Military District along the southern tier. These guys from the Eastern Military District are in western Ukraine. Here are some of their generals who have died. Can you imagine a general officer dying in combat? Have you seen it among us, right? Very few, very, very few. But the Russians are leading from the front now because their troops don't want to be there. And they have to lead from the front to inspire their soldiers to even follow. That's kind of bizarre. Now take note of the 6th Combined Arms Army. A lieutenant general was fired by Putin last week. That is also very rare. He's part of the Western Military District, and I had bet on the 6th Combined Arms Army leading across into the west and then swinging north into Kyiv. They're obviously not going to do that. It will be another unit from the West Military District. Okay, so strengths, they've got the numbers, air superiority, NBC capability, weaknesses. This is a very unpopular war inside of Russia. Russians don't want anything to do with it. Poor soldier morale. They're running out of stuff. And their junior leaders are inexperienced in combat. Opportunities for them, they can continue to attack the United States, because if they do that, we can supply less support for Ukraine. There are still people are still buying Russian oil, especially India and China. They're buying it at a discounted rate. And it's forming a great trade relationship between Russia, India, and China. Threats, economic sanctions, of course. Do you know somebody could invade Russia right now and just roll all over them until they got to Moscow because they're so depleted? I heard an estimate from a U.S. Army general who said that 70 to 75% of Russian ground forces are right now fighting in Ukraine. That's enormous. Can you believe that? They could be rolled over, but nobody wants to attack Russia. What for? Why would you want to attack Russia? Okay, here's what we've got. Eastern Military District, the 29th, is Well, from Rovno, or I called it Rovno. What do they call it nowadays? Rivne? But they're on the Western Front. I think they're going to move to the border before there's an NBC attack, nuclear, biological, or chemical. I was thinking they would pop a nuke. I was thinking that a low-yield nuclear weapon airburst would be done probably at Rovno. But now I'm thinking that Putin is so unpopular at home, he wouldn't do that. Instead, he'll use what they call the father of all bombs. You've heard of our Moab, mother of all bombs? The Russians have a father of all bombs. And they could actually drop one of those and then tell Kyiv, now you better surrender or we're going to drop one on you. I think that's what's going to happen. Before that happens, the 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, a historic unit from World War II, is going to move towards the west and then swing up towards Kyiv. Well, here's all my estimations for what's going to happen. I only have 1 more minute, so I can't go into it. But if in your questions you want to ask me the effect on China and Taiwan, if you want to talk to me about the Chinese putting a base in Venezuela, I used to do global analyses, or they call it global issues. One thing over here doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's going to affect the rest of the world. If Ukraine falls, we're in for some bad times within the next 10 years globally. What do we do? Well, that's up to everyone here. Oh, before an NBC weapon happens, watch for the Russian elements to disperse from the area that's in the target zone. Watch for communications to suddenly go down. That's it.
First, I just want to thank you for inviting me today. Drove in from Pittsburgh this afternoon. Being from Pittsburgh, I'm particularly grateful for the pierogies, so whoever made those, thank you. I'm actually Slovak. I just want to say that. Sometimes people think I'm Russian. I'm often told to go back to Russia. I'm not from Russia. So, in any case, but if there are Russians out there, I do want to say, by the way, I don't pray for your early ascension to heaven. And that is to say, and I do think it's important to say this, I really do, that in the same way I don't expect people abroad to hold me responsible for the U.S. war in Iraq or Afghanistan or Somalia or et cetera, I'm not going to hold an individual Russian responsible for what their government's doing. And I actually don't like the anti-Russian hatred that I see, you know, and I think that's disturbing to me. And again, I don't see that coming my way. I've traveled all over the world, and I'm always treated wonderfully. I was actually in Lebanon and Syria twice last year, so I feel very much at home here in this church. And I will talk, if I can talk a second about Syria, because I think it's kind of relevant to maybe a point I want to make. And it was a little surprising to me, because I knew some things about Syria, but not tons when I went. So we had to drive. You fly into Beirut, and then you drive to Damascus. You can't fly into Damascus. I mean, there's some ways to do it, I think, but not for mere mortals like myself. But I want to also say something else. That, again, I do a little stream of consciousness thing. One thing I thought a lot about was Saul on the way to Damascus, right? Saul becomes St. Paul on the road from Jerusalem, I believe it was, to Damascus, which I believe he made either by foot or horse or camel or something, right? But he went by land. You can't do that anymore, right? You can't go from Jerusalem to Damascus on land. By land, you can't even do it by air, right? And I always tell people, you know, we used to say the world's getting smaller. In fact, in many ways, it's getting bigger, right? Because you can't do stuff like that. You can't go to Russia now very easily, right? Flights have been cut off. Anyway, that's a very interesting thing that's happening, and that's too bad, because you do learn a lot visiting other countries. Well, let me tell you a couple things I learned. I actually got to go to Malula, Syria, twice, and you mentioned Aramaic. It's one of the few cities in the world that speaks Aramaic. And I believe it's the biggest one, the language of Jesus Christ. And during the Syrian conflict, the Free Syrian Army, that the CIA, of course, supported, invaded Malula, took nuns, kidnapped nuns, tried to destroy the church. Thank God it was made of stone. They tried to burn it. Not much of it burned, a little did. But they did destroy relics and a tomb that was there of a saint. And they tried to destroy Christianity in Malula because, in fact, these were radical jihadists that the U.S. was backing. And interestingly enough, it was the Syrian army and a group out of Lebanon called Hezbollah that actually protected Malula. And you can talk to the nuns there and they'll tell you that. And that was true in Homs too, by the way. There's a Syrian church. They're Syrian Orthodox. And it's the Holy, I'm trying to get the whole name, it is the Church of the Holy Girdle of Mary. And they claim to have the belt of the Virgin Mary. And the church dates back to something like 59 AD. And it started out in caves. You can go in the basement going through the caves. And they were attacked by the same Free Syrian army. Thankfully, they had secreted the belt out of town, and it was hidden. And of course, it was the Syrian army and I believe Hezbollah again, that defended the town, and it was the Syrian army that helped bring the belt back to the church. Which I found very interesting. And by the way, in Malula, where they destroyed a lot of the relics, in truth, it was the Russians that sent replacements, not real ones, but at least replicas. Almost all of the paintings in the older part of the church are just all replicas now, because those were all destroyed. But the point is this. I mean, one thing that bothers me about some of the discourse about Russia and Ukraine, to be honest, is some idea that we as a country ourselves, the United States, somehow has some sort of innocence in all this and in the world. I think Biden said, this is the first war in Europe since World War II. Well, there was something called the bombing of Serbia for 79 days by NATO. Yeah. Which mostly targeted, by the way, civilian infrastructure and civilians. And by the way, the U.S. twice intervened to prevent 2 peace agreements that could have prevented the whole thing. But again, we just forget that. And on the timeline that was given, it's also forgotten that, frankly, this war didn't start a month ago. It started 8 years ago. There's been a war between Kieth and the Russian-speaking population in Donbass for 14 years. 8 years. And 14,000 people have died in that. 80% being people in the Donbass. And I'll just be honest, I didn't see a lot of people standing with Donbass or the eastern part of Ukraine for 8 years. And that's not directed towards anyone in this room, but I'm just saying generically, If we want to have solidarity, we should have solidarity with those people too. And this war didn't come out of nowhere. I'm not defending it, but it didn't come out of nowhere. And from a moral point of view, from a religious point of view, if you look at the prophets, right, they didn't go around saying, if I was, a prophet in Jerusalem, I didn't go to Egypt and say, hey, Egypt, your leaders are bad. No, I went to my leaders. The job is to tell your own leaders you're bad. That's the job of a prophet. My dad used to tell me, Dan, my dad and I, we didn't see eye to eye on anything, but he had some good words of wisdom. And he once used to say, Dan, prophets are never accepted in their own country. Why? Because they point the finger at their own leaders, their own kings. And we have our own kings who are supporting Saudi Arabia right now in bombing Yemen. 400,000 people have died in that. 400,000. And I don't see people on Facebook standing with Yemen or with Yemenis flags. And that bothers me. There is a hypocrisy in some of this. And I'm sorry, I am in a church, so I'm going to speak like I'm in a church. And it bothers me. But more relevant to it is, how is this going to end? And how do we end it? And I think the following way. I think if we want to end it, the U.S., which frankly helped stir up a lot of this stuff, by supporting the coup in 2014, by supporting ultra-right-wing elements in Ukraine, and arming them. In fact, it got so bad that Congressman John Conyers out of Detroit had a resolution passed in Congress saying maybe we shouldn't be arming Nazis. And then I guess they decided we should arm Nazis because that bill was later repealed. Do you remember that? But in any case, if the U.S. wants to do something to end this war, they should work for peace. They should help with the peace negotiations. As the boss of NATO, which they are, they should say that they're not going to admit Ukraine into NATO, and they're going to say the Minsk agreements are going to be followed, which means the people of the Donbass should stop being attacked as well. Thank you. And I was going to sit down because I figured I'd be a smaller target, but I'm going to move quickly to my seat.
The theme of this program is what the outcome means for the United States and the world. We have prayed a lot. We prayed today in church. If you read the Vindicator today, see Pope Francis is talking perhaps about going to Kieth. In the same Vindicator article, there's an article about Mormons calling for solution-oriented works. So I'm talking prayer, we're talking solution-oriented works. Well, what else? What else are we looking for? How else should the United States be involved? Looking on the whole spectrum, it would go from fully supporting Ukraine, perhaps even troops on the ground, to all the way on the other side, supporting Russia and everything in between. Maybe doing nothing. Maybe urging negotiations, using the United Nations more. Saying, as Attorney Kovalik said, that we can say no to NATO for Ukraine. It could be that we'll impose even stronger sanctions and more humanitarian aid. It could be that we should send the jets from Poland or wherever else. Somebody I just heard this morning on one of the news broadcasts talked about dismantling the jets and sending them in there the way we send in other items. My question to you then is, to all of you, what is your solution? If you had your way, what would you be telling President Biden and our Congress?
It is a very sad fact, my friends, that we have in the world, this country included, the nuclear weapons. I am not a proponent of using them. I might personally wish we could use nuclear power just for peaceful purposes. But the truth is that we have nuclear weapons, this country included. Now, what does having nuclear weapons mean? It means peace, right? You can go to bed without any problems, because you know that if something happens, if China attacks or Russia attacks, my country has nuclear weapons. My country also used to have nuclear weapons before 1994. Before Clinton administration, Bill Clinton and his administration, before John Major of the United Kingdom and his administration, before Boris Yeltsin and his administration decided to seize the moment, take advantage of the economically weak Ukraine and pressure Ukraine, holding a carrot in front of Ukraine, and pressure Ukraine to get rid of this deterrent, thereby making my country vulnerable. Right? Can I say it is a fact? It is a fact, right? The US, Russia, and the UK, also there was China and France afterwards with their own separate documents, denuclearized Ukraine, making it vulnerable. So my question would be to President Biden as the US President, what was the purpose? What was he pursuing with this? How come nobody talked about denuclearizing Russia or the US or whatever other country? So actions have consequences, right? So this is part of the mess we're in. Because if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, we would have never ever had the mess we're in right now. Never ever. You need to remember, my friends, that taking into account the sad history of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, and we've seen the 1932-33 Holodomor, artificial famine, that artificially the Soviets killed millions of Ukrainians. We have the Russian gulags, right? There was always these imperial desires, right, to take over. I mean, when you look at the size of Russia, do they really need Ukraine? Why do they need Ukraine? I tell you why. It is because the cradle of Christianity in Ukraine is not in Russia, but in Kieth. Back in 988, when Kieth was a flourishing city, Moscow was not even on the map. Kieth was founded in 482, and that's the stats, at least officially. Moscow was founded in 1147. All right? So when you start digging, my friends, when you start answering the questions as to, the nation of Ukraine and the territory, I am sorry, if the Russians want to make a claim that somehow we are part of Ukraine, I think it's the other way around. I think they're occupying our Ukrainian territory. If we are, the question is how far you're going to go back to, right? How far back you want to go. And so, my friends, again, it is very sad, going back to the nuclear question, it is a very sad reality that nuclear weapons are the deterrent for peace. But I repeat again, it is because of the US, Russia, and the UK that we are in this mess right now. I'm not trying to point any fingers, but I'm simply stating the fact, in case you were wondering, how come? Actions have consequences. All right? If you had the audacity to press Ukraine to get rid of nukes, now have the audacity to help us. Because as sad as it sounds, Ukraine right now needs the protection as if we had nuclear weapons. Not less. As if we had nuclear weapons. I don't see Roman bishops in this country raising red flags, we should get rid of the nuclear weapons here in the United States. I don't remember hearing that. We're comfortable with this, aren't we? Or let's sit down around the table and say, you know what? Russia, US, Israel, which are other countries, let's get rid of them, period. But until that happens, my friends, until this country has them, Russia has them. In lieu of what happened back in 1994, and yes, they say, yes, it was no security guarantees, but it was security assurances. Does that make me Ukrainian? Think about the US, UK, and Russia. Oh, so you're trying to trick us then. You could care less about denuclearization. You're trying to trick Ukraine into this. Is that what I'm supposed to think like that? Let me repeat my point again, my friends. If the US, UK, and Russia had the guts to pressure economically weak Ukraine after the fall of the Soviet Union back in 1991, in 1994, that you have to find the guts right now to make sure that the country is protected as if we had nuclear weapons. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Father.
And as a follow-up, Father, specifically answering the question, how should the United States become involved along my spectrum? Are you suggesting that the United States, United Kingdom, ought to threaten nuclear involvement? Well, I mean, we can't go back and give the nukes back to Ukraine. We can't do that. But shall we, those countries that support Ukraine, should we rattle the saber?
I think, here's the problem. I mean, I'm a priest, right? So don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of using violence, right? But we gotta be, every country has a right to defend, according to the just war doctrine, right? One of the points, right? To make sure that, we use the means that are not greater than the evil that try to be eliminated. Now, there are other means, right, to pressure a country to stop whatever the country is doing. You see what's happening, right? There's a hypocrisy happening right now. I think Attorney Kovalik mentioned it during his talk. Well, maybe not in exact same terms. Despite of all of these sanctions, right? They're talking about sanctions. If these sanctions worked, Russians would have stopped it. But we have yet companies still doing business with Russia, bypassing through Belarus. Yeah, you're going to sanction certain sector of the Russian economy. But we're going to use Belarus. Guess what? Because they're basically, Russian, part of Russia. De facto, we can say right now, at least right now, right? I am not, of course, in favor of threatening, Russia. If you don't you dare to drop a nuclear bomb on Ukraine or whatever. But I think there are, in this day and age, there are enough means that we can put pressure on. But let's play a fair game. Let's not pretend that we are, I'm going to say on TV, it's so wonderful, all these sanctions. But in reality, do they work? The question of SWIFT banking system. I mean, I can go on and on and on. My point is, not enough has been done, I think, economically, to stop this Russian aggression, this absolutely senseless Russian aggression that doesn't make sense no matter how you approach it. Simply because somebody wants to bring back Soviet Union in a different disguise, because somebody was upset of the fallout of the USSR back in 1991. We have the means, my friends. But I mentioned solidarity in my opening remarks, right? Solidarity is the key. If the countries like Poland, Lithuania, they're really, also in the United States, of course, UK too, right? But you look at Germany and France. President Macron can sit in his Versailles palace being warm, and the Ukrainian babies are born in basements. People drinking bottled water. And we're just watching it as a show? And then Scholz making themselves, President Trump was right, in fact, when he said, you want us to protect you? And you being dependent on the Russian energy sector? How does it make sense? You want American troops in Germany? And yet you're going to pay billions of euros to Russians. How in the world does it make sense? My friends, I think it's time to stop hypocrisy.
Thank you, Father. I think we don't even have. Thank you. We'll turn the mic to Colonel Tiffany, please. Same question.
Sure, the same question.
No.
Next person?
We'll do 3 rounds.
Sure. Yeah, let's go with Dr. Jacob Labendz, please.
So in lieu of asking, I do have really serious questions about China, but I want to focus on something that you did say, and the questions, you said that the war is deeply unpopular in Russia. To the best of my understanding, the last reliable opinion poll, which was earlier, I don't know exactly when, around the time of the invasion, had 25% opposition. Since then, there's been a massive crackdown, and we've seen really astoundingly brave opposition. But that ruins opinion polling. It's very hard to get a sense of what people in Russia actually believe. So, on what basis are you saying that it's really unpopular? I've seen things that might make me think quite opposite.
Yeah, well, I'm basing it mostly on what I see on BBC News, and it can be completely wrong, I'll give you that. But I also see the reactions of the Russian soldiers inside Ukraine, and they're not very happy to be there. From what I understand, even one of the colonels in a motorized rifle division was run over by one of his troops because he was angry about the high casualty rate. So I don't think it's a popular war at all.
Then my follow-up is this. Two split follow-up. One is the extent that communication from the soldiers on the front are able to reach Russia. How much there is a communication, because that will matter in that sense. Right, in the Vietnam War, it changed things. In the United States, it doesn't change. I don't know what's getting into Russia. And the next question is, how vulnerable is Putin to popular opinion?
Putin worries about what his own people will do, especially his military commanders. Putin is an intelligence guy who rose to power by eliminating his opponents. He knows the same thing can happen to him, and he's very, very skilled at staying alive. But he knows that at any moment, one of the people he trusts could end him. The same thing happened with Mrs. Gandhi, remember? And her own personal bodyguard ended her. Putin must be very, very nervous right now. Notice when he sits and talks with even his staff, there's some distance between himself and others. In arm's reach, you can kill a man. And he's concerned. And he's also concerned for his wife and daughter in Switzerland or in, well, they have another place in the south of France. And they're so closely guarded now, we don't even know where they are. So yes, he's concerned about his own well-being. Now what can he do? If he lets go in Ukraine, if Ukraine pushes him out, he's even less popular now. He has nobody whom he can count on to protect him, to defend him. He has nowhere to go, really. He has to win in Ukraine. What do you think he's going to do? Yeah.
I study nationalism, not military policy.
Oh, I just look at this man. I've monitored him for some time. He's a ruthless killer. And I think he will do anything to stay in power and to protect his own family. I don't think that there are any people around him who are 100% loyal to him, and I think he's starting to realize that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
All right, we can move to Dr. Lepak, please.
Thank you very much. You hear me? Yes. Good. Father Lubomir, I respect your position very much.
Thank you.
As a priest and theologian, do you agree that we live in a fallen world?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think also that living in a fallen world, especially when the question of power is the issue, is a particularly complicating factor?
As I know if you paid attention to the
Yes.
quote I used from the Bible,
exactly.
right? What, if you gain the whole world, right, and you lose the soul in the
Correct.
process,
Correct.
what do you gain? What do you gain? And this is exactly the dilemma I have as a believer.
Yes.
If a person, and you see Putin parading, in front of the cameras with the Russian Orthodox hierarchy, right?
Right.
So the presumption is you believe, right? Even that lecture he gave before February 24th, where he lectured how Ukrainians and Russians are the same people. Yes, there are common elements with us, absolutely. But if you follow this logic of his, if this is true what he says, is he killing his own people now in Ukraine?
Good question.
So I have family in Russia. Actually, my mom's sister, she's Ukrainian, of course, and she went to study to the city of now called Veliki Novgorod, right? Not too far from St. Petersburg. And, she married a Russian. Eventually, they have a family. I've been to Russia many a time. And my family have been to Ukraine many a time from Russia. Unfortunately, right now, because of this tremendous propaganda that's being done by the Russian government, I have difficulty communicating with my own aunt because she has been brainwashed by all of this. And, she's making this and that statement, saying that really, I can't believe this. When they came, I want to ask her, when you came with your family to Ukraine, were you ever attacked by some nationalists? When I went to Russia, was I ever attacked by some Russian nationalists? No. The answer is strong no, both questions. Absolutely not. We can't, because the Russian people are wonderful people. I've been to Russia again many a time, a wonderful country. It's a nice country to go to. Sit down and you talk, and yeah, you might have disagreements. But this war? Because somebody has this crazy idea of, building this Russian world, and the effects of this is anything but what he's trying to accomplish. Because unfortunately, when you see, as I said before, when you see kids trying, draw these pictures, little children, you can imagine how much hatred is with the adults right now.
You had the same thing in Afghanistan with little children drawing pictures of Americans.
And of course the answer, my friends, of course for us as Christians, is the prayer. We need to pray
Pray, just to bring, and
And I would suggest praying for Russians too, and not just to die.
for the conversion, absolutely.
Yes, to change
absolutely.
their hearts and change
Metanoia.
their minds. Very good, thank
Metanoia.
you. I have a question for Professor Kovalik. Thank you very much. I appreciate it as a political scientist when you do introduce inconvenient facts that people don't want to pay attention to in the world. Question: is it entirely possible that this situation is the result of power politics between the United States and Russia, with the Ukrainians being the victims?
I think that's exactly what it is. I do. And in fact, I think, again, not to take away, obviously, from Russia's culpability here, but it's very clear to me, honestly, that the U.S. wanted this conflict and, frankly, set Ukraine up for it. In fact, Zelensky publicly stated recently, he said privately, he was told by the Americans that Ukraine would never be part of NATO, but that was not to be the public position. Right? That's all that had that been agreed to, we may not be where we are. And he was told, you're never going to be in it, but don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Don't tell the Russians. I mean, if I were the Ukrainians, I wouldn't be very happy with the United States.
No.
And if I were the Germans, I wouldn't either. I mean, frankly, I think the EU's been sacrificed by the US as well. I mean, frankly, we kind of helped start a conflict and then kind of said, well, bye-bye, you're all on your own, which we do all the time. By the way, I'm sorry, the US is probably the worst ally you could ever have, right? I mean, we just don't tell the truth. And of course, the other thing we lied about was we told Gorbachev NATO would never move an inch past Germany if he allowed Germany to reunify. He did, and no sooner did we promise it than we're on the board, NATO's on the borders of Russia. And by the way, I found it interesting when my colleague here mentioned the Chinese maybe having a military base in Venezuela. I heard a lot of gasps. Well, the Russians have been gasping a long time about NATO on their border.
Heaven's a sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
And we have no empathy for that. We have no, had anyone in power had the willingness to listen to those concerns, we might not be here either. And that's why they better start listening to them now before it's too late, before we do have a nuclear war, which I'll go on record as saying I oppose. I think nuclear, I'll quote the current Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran, and by the way, his predecessor, Khomeini, who issued fatwas against the building and maintenance and use of nuclear weapons. I actually think that is a morally superior position.
Yes, it should be pointed out too,
Yeah.
just to follow up on observations by Father about hypocrisy, stated that we could not enter Ukraine because it was not a member of NATO. The problem is, NATO has been present in other non-member countries, including Afghanistan. So this is really, somewhat unsettling. I have a question for Colonel Tiffany.
Can we move to Dr.
Oh, sure.
Beelen?
Yep.
We'll come back to you. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll go to Daniel again. Think that there, I haven't had a chance to ask. And again, it's my basic question of, along the spectrum, what should we do? And it appears to me, if I could just editorialize a minute, you seem to be in league with Pat Buchanan, who said in the last couple of weeks that, in one major article, did we provoke Putin's war in Ukraine?
Well, I never want to be in league with Pat Buchanan.
I didn't think so.
But on the other hand, well, as we used to say, now this has no meaning anymore, and that is a broken clock is right twice a day. Of course, most people don't have clocks anymore. But looking around the room and all the gray hairs, I think you get the joke. But actually, I would say I'm more in the league of a guy like Jack Matlock, who was the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, or Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who was an aide to the White House security, who also take the position that the U.S. helped provoke this, and therefore it's the U.S. that should help ratchet it down. I agree with the Chinese on this, who said the one who put the bell on the tiger's neck should take it off. And I think that's what the U.S. needs to do.
We're saying then that to remove the sanctions then?
Well, what I think we should do is...
the various kinds of armaments that that we're sending now?
We should not send armaments. I don't think so. I think in terms of sanctions, at least we should say, if you get out and the war ends, then they end. I mean, you don't. How is it any incentive to put sanctions on seemingly forever? It's no incentive to change your actions. Because I don't, by the way, think it was ever intended to change anyone's actions. And by the way, the sanctions are way overly punishing in the sense that they're mostly going to hurt average Russians. And by the way, average Americans and average Europeans. That's who's going to be hurt by these. And good luck to Biden winning, or Democrats winning in the fall, given all that when the inflation goes really bad and the gas prices go really high. Again, none of this was well thought out. Let's be very clear. But in any case, I would say whatever the sanctions are, you should say, okay, we'll lift them if you do the right thing. But also, I do think we should engage with the peace talks. And again, make it clear publicly, I guess what we told Zelensky privately, is that Ukraine won't be part of NATO, you know? That seems like that should have been done a long time ago, but certainly it should be done now. But I don't see adding fuel to the fire in terms of weapons, and certainly nuclear weapons. I don't see that is something that the world needs right now. Again, maybe the opposite. Maybe, hey, maybe we should start talking about getting rid of all of our nuclear weapons. I'd be way in favor of that. So,
Right.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And Dr. Jacob, please.
So I'll shift focus for a moment, just so we move around the panel. It's very interesting, though. This is a question for Father Lubomir in this case. You've described this, I think, touchingly and painfully as a fight. You raised the question of whether or not Putin thinks of himself as attacking his own people. And in some ways it seems that he does, right? In some ways he seems that Russia is only complete when it encompasses Ukraine, and the Ukrainians who disagree with that are framed as Nazis. So my question to you is not about geopolitics. It's about what it means to be Ukrainian at this point, right? If there was this union, or a religious union, a union of having the same, at least Eastern religion, Eastern Catholicism, what is happening, because you know people in Ukraine, still yourself Ukrainian, what's happening to what it means to be Ukrainian? Because it seems to be part of the fight from the beginning, when we put the geopolitics aside, a cosmopolitan vision of Ukraine versus a national vision of Ukraine, a religious vision of Ukraine. You know, I was announced as somebody with Ukrainian roots. And it's true that my family came from territories that became Ukraine, but when they left, it was switching between the Kingdom of Romania and the Russian Empire. And in neither one of those cases would Jews generally be associated with Ukrainians. They could be good neighbors, but they would never have thought of themselves or have been thought of as Ukrainian. Right? That comes later. My family, with whom we lost touch, if they've survived until now, may think of themselves as Ukrainian Jews, or maybe they're not Jewish anymore. So what happens to Ukrainians? What's happening now to the way that Ukrainians are thinking about what it means to be Ukrainian?
I mean, as I said before, you know, it all depends how far back you want to go. The first mention of the word Ukraine actually dates back to 1187. That's the first time. Now, at that time, it was referring to the borderline of the Kieth, you know, Kieth city, right? And over time, of course, you know, over the centuries, we developed, you can say, a nation called Ukraine with their own language, with their own culture, with their own history. And yes, when you look at Ukraine right now, for example, right, there used to be times when there was under Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Polish Empire, Soviet Union. I mean, when you look at the history of Ukraine, everybody, for some reason, tried to attack us. And, you know, it seems like north, south, east, west, everybody wanted a piece of Ukraine. Yes, we used to be called breadbasket of Europe. We have rich black soil. And you look at the Ukrainian flag, right, two beautiful stripes, blue and yellow, blue sky, golden wheat fields. We're bread makers. We're not warriors. Except that right now, of course, Russians understand that bread makers can fight. Quite strongly, by the way. Almost 18,000 troops later, they do realize that. Unfortunately, right? And so yes, I mean, to be Ukrainian, of course, it's this identity we have now, right? We have our own country, right? We had the country that we had back in 1991. If that's the historical time frame you want to go back to, okay? How come Russians were okay with that back then? Not a problem, right? We were all right. We were, I mean, there's, you know, my friends, you need to understand one thing. And currently, of course, yes, Ukraine is a major part, it's a Christian country, actually a major part, Orthodox country. Orthodox Church is the major religion, then comes Catholic Church and other denominations. And our president actually is Jewish right now. President Zelensky is Jewish. We have Muslims present as well. I mean, it's a multicultural, you know, it's the second largest by size country in Europe after France. But yes, we have developed over time the identity, just like here in the United States, right? Before 1776, when it was French and British colonies. Now you probably say you're American, right? And so am I. And likewise, I'm saying I'm a proud Ukrainian, right? And yes, when you go back all the way, when you go back to when the Kieth was founded, back into the 5th century, you can go back to the 5th century, you can go back to the 10th century, when Ukraine was officially, if you will, baptized, accepted officially Christianity in the 10th century, which happened, by the way, in Kieth, not in Moscow. Right? So yes, we do have identity, we do have language, and we, you know, we are proud of our own country. We're not attacking anybody. Yes, the whole NATO question, which makes me ask a question myself again. Were we set up again, like with the nuclear weapons back in 1994? Was it another setup? Whom can we trust anymore, really? I mean, who can we trust? Chinese, or, I mean, I don't know. So you see, you know, I mentioned solidarity, my friends. There needs to be, we need, of course, sit down at some kind of table and say, wait a minute, what are we doing wrong? Are we lying to our own people? Are we pretending to be this good, and in fact we're not? And I think this is what's happening also with Russia, with the sanctions. Because remember, Minister Lavrov of Foreign Affairs of Russia, he was so adamant in saying that no, why all of this hysteria all about? This is just the military exercises. Next thing we know, you know, they invade. So the Russian people should ask themselves, is my government lying to me? What is going on here? We're not claiming, we don't want anybody's territory. We do not want to strip Russians of their own identity. You have your own country, that enormous country. It's like David and Goliath, right? We know who won, right? When I use the analogy. Leave us alone. Let us continue. I mean, right now, what we're at right now, because also Russia and Ukraine, we are now, my friend, as a serious issue at the crisis of famine. Because Ukraine is one of the world's major export partners of wheat. Especially the Middle East, Africa. Right? Probably South America as well. I mean, and now Russians, what they're trying to do, they've been stealing our wheat, by the way, trying to reestablish it. And I mean, it's a war, my friends. We need to understand that we need to meet this war with the force exerted upon us. We cannot simply stand there and watch innocent people being killed, children being killed. We need to do something about it. And I hope that this change comes from within of Russia. Again, I've been to this country. I know these people, they're good people. We don't want to be enemies with Russians. I don't want to call Russian people enemies. I don't want to call them enemies to combat. I want to build bridges with them, not to build walls. But simply, you know, former KGB agent decided otherwise. He wants to rewrite history. Because somehow, and I think he said that himself, actually, Putin said that the fall of the Soviet Union was, I think he called it, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, or something he said. I don't remember verbatim.
All right.
We need to stop this madness.
Thank you, Father. And Dr. Lubek, I think.
My judgment, this war is not ending anytime soon. I think Mr. Putin is going to go on with it. This question for Colonel Tiffany. What other weapons does he have that he's not used yet, which aren't nuclear, biological, chemical? For example, thermobaric weapons, nuclear depleted weapons. What else? Carpet bombing. What else can you think of?
Something they haven't used yet would
Yeah.
be heard about an explosion that happens and then a secondary explosion happens right away. It's advanced technology, but when you have two explosions and a lot of coordination within nanoseconds to make another explosion, you can push the effects of it. That's been done, you know, but it hasn't been done by a nation. It's been done by a terrorist one time that I know of.
Okay.
But it would be something if they took the father of all bombs and they had another detonation that immediately burst after that and amplified the detonation to mow down a city.
Yeah.
That could be done. It's very well within their capabilities. I haven't seen it. I don't think they're going to do nuclear, right, because of the fallout problems. I don't think they're going to do chemical because they want to claim the land soon after that. It's coming up on planting season right now. It's got to end soon. They've got to do something dramatic.
Right.
I would think that they're going to do something horrible, something very, very big, and that would be the father of all bombs with a push, a resonating bomb is what the technology is called.
Right.
That's what I think is next.
Last point, I just want to point out that one particular academic from the University of Chicago, John Mershimer, no relation to Pat Buchanan, predicted back in 2015 that if the United States, NATO, and the EU did not stop their efforts to wean away Ukraine from Russia, quote, Putin would wreck Ukraine.
Okay, yeah, sorry, we're done with the questions. So we are opening the questions for our audience.
My question, though, is this. It seems to me that the problems orbit around NATO entanglements. NATO should have gone away when the Soviet Union fell, because that's what NATO was about. It was about stopping the Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union went away, you know, why is NATO still even relevant? This particular problem is made a lot more complicated by the NATO entanglements. So my question is, and I'll open it up to anybody really, is we should be looking for off-ramps, particularly for Putin to save face and get out of this, and for the Ukrainians to feel empowered so that they can get out of this. And we're not. No matter what cable news you turn on, all the commentariat is about, hey, let's go. You know, it's all bellicose. Nobody's talking about the off-ramps. So I'd just like to open it up. What do you believe that the off-ramps should be and maybe are? And what can we do as people sitting in this room to move the United States, whose hands are not clean in this, toward a position of looking for off-ramps instead of more bellicosity? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one response, please.
First of all, thank you for that. I think very good question, very informed question. Yeah, except the part driven. Yeah, you're okay. You're okay by me.
You do it all, Ray.
But here's a couple thoughts I have about that. First of all, I want to, before I get to that, can I just, there is, just if we're going to look at what Putin's aims are, he did have, he has a very famous quote about the collapse of the Soviet Union, and what he said was, it's a two-part. And he said, anyone who did not shed a tear at the collapse of the Soviet Union does not have a heart. The second part was, anyone who thinks it will be restored does not have a brain. Okay, so there is a second part to that quote. again, what I think Americans should be doing is to appeal to the people in Washington who I think actually do want to find an off-ramp for Russia. And again, and I would urge you to look for this Colonel Douglas McGregor. He's been interviewed in a number of different fora. And his belief, and there's a number of people I've heard this from, so I think it's true. He thinks Joe Biden and the Defense Department, the Pentagon, are two places where the grown-ups are trying to stop this from hurtling towards something worse, and would like there to be an off-ramp. So first of all, I think that's where there is an ability to have some persuasiveness. And again, I think the off-ramp is, and I agree, everyone has to come out with something, and I do think one is Ukraine not part of NATO, Ukraine neutral. Again, seems easy, seems like that was probably the plan anyway, the real plan. And I think, though, there also has to be, and again, the Minsk agreements, which the U.S. agreed to, right, as part of the UN Security Council, which unanimously approved the Minsk agreements, provided for the end of hostilities with the Donbass region, with Lugansk and Donetsk, and did provide for a certain level of autonomy for them within Ukraine, but they would be potentially federal republics, and they would have elections. And I think just having Ukraine agree to really abide by those, plus them not in NATO, I think you come very close to having a deal at that point. So I think that is what should be pushed towards. And again, I think there are forces in Washington that want that, but there are other forces that are pushing for a wider war, and I think that is what we should be pushing against. Thank you.
Can I, by protocol, just ask a question?
Sure.
I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, you did.
My name is Tom. As I sit here, and I really appreciate comments on both sides, I look at this flag up here and it says United Nations. Where is United Nations in this conflict? The United Nations was very instrumental in the Balkan War with Serbia and Herzegovina. Where are they, and why are we not hearing more from the United Nations in this regards? Thank you.
They are involved with humanitarian.
Okay.
items.
Anybody?
Great.
I'm going to break my own decorum and jump in here because this is my area. The United Nations is paralyzed in the Security Council. The only reason the Korean War, which probably most of us don't know, was United Nations police action, is that the Russians pounded a shoe on the table and walked out. And with them out of the room, Security Council passed an action. In fact, I have a little flag that I didn't put up, I thought about putting up, that showed all the United Nations troops that fought in the Korean War. When there are still 8,000 missing U.S. soldiers, not to talk about Greece and Norway and everybody else who fought. When that soldier's bones are found in Korea, it doesn't come back to the United States under that flag, but this flag, until it hits Dover, Delaware. Then they change over to an American flag. Okay, so we can't blame the United Nations because it was designed for the nuclear powers to all have a veto. So the United Nations does wonderful work, as Dr. Beelen mentioned, in providing food and medicine, and your letters get where they are, your planes don't crash because all international pilots speak English. There's 100 things they do. But enforcing by force is not one. Serbia was not the United Nations. It was Britain, France, and us. We put in heavy divisions. It was not even really a NATO thing. It was our thing. Three of the big powers. So, and you'll find that across the world. The United Nations has never taken an action militarily except in Korea. So, veto, it's done, that's it.
Thank you, Ray. Let's see if Captain Greg Urge here.
The only questions I really have is basically speaking is, why is Ukraine being sold out for oil and gas? Why are we still purchasing? We helped support Russia and buying gas and oil from them, not just from us, but also from all the European Union nations also as well. I'm not saying Britain as well. So basically we helped fuel this problem. Why haven't we stopped? I mean, come on. We're all compliciting to this problem, and the European nations. And anyone who turns a blind eye and a deaf ear to this is just equally as guilty as a person and or persons committing this crime. I served in the military. If you turn a blind eye and a deaf ear under military uniform code of justice, we all know this. You are equally as guilty and can be found guilty as the people or persons committing that crime. We know that. He knows that because we served. Why aren't people being held accountable? Why are we still purchasing oil and gas from these people, from Russia? And basically we're fueling this problem. That's just not us, but we're talking countries throughout the world.
Brian, you want an answer to that?
Lieutenant Colonel, I'm going to promote you back to your proper rank. You were demoted to lieutenant earlier.
Yeah, if you have a response, please.
Into the mic, please.
That's a difficult one. I'm not a politician.
I know.
John, in the mic.
Into the mic.
What I've seen is that the environmentalists have a great deal of influence over the United States right now. And so there is not the production of petroleum products that we used to have. I think that has a lot to do with it, and the environmental groups are getting a lot of support from China and from Russia. This isn't an internal thing. There's a global influence on the United States.
They're afraid they'll turn the speaker off.
Oh, you don't like that, huh?
Well, it's amazing because I know, how come Trump, we sold our reserves, part of our reserves to Russia in the first place?
I don't know.
We don't know that, but I'm still saying, the question is, okay, I know people work for the gas and oil industry. We have pipelines throughout this whole country.
Yes.
My dad used to work for USX, who owned Marathon Oil. They pipe gas, natural gas, from all the way from Texas all the way into Youngstown, Ohio. We have pipelines all over the place. This is like an excuse, because we have pipelines all going throughout this whole country, natural gas and otherwise going through, and of course Alaska, that went through areas that were natural preserves.
Can we please stick to the question?
Yeah, we're seeing the question, but why are we still purchasing, or maybe we've stopped and I haven't been watching the news, so correct me if I'm wrong, why are we still purchasing oil from Russia?
Because we're not producing it locally.
Why is the government, who's to dictate to the government what we do with our oil?
First of all, I think at the height, I think we are largely independent in terms of fuel. I think, and you can check this, I think even at the height, at most we were importing 3% of our oil from Russia. I mean, I think it's nominal, and I don't know what we are doing now. My guess is it's... is it 8%?
8%.
Okay. It's still fairly small. Of course, I would also ask why we're buying oil from Saudi Arabia that's, you know, a monarchy, and again, committing much worse atrocities in Yemen, and we're selling arms to them, by the way, including cluster bombs. But
right,
yeah,
I get what you're saying, but also the pipelines also were built back in the days of the USSR when it was going into East Germany.
We will need to move to another question.
So anyway,
please.
we're still purchasing, and the Europeans are still purchasing.
Thank you so much. We will
So that's
need to
basically
move.
my biggest concern, why we're still doing this.
Thank you so much. We'll need to move to another question for the time being.
I want to thank my good friend Raymond Nakley for putting this all on, and our distinguished panelists, responders. Belonging to the Society of St. John Chrysostom as a co-sponsor of this event, we've always worked for Christian unity and common ground. I would like to ask Father Lubomir, and I know it's anecdotal, it's very hard to get accurate information, but our brothers in Christ in Ukraine working together, Catholics, Roman Catholics, Greek Catholics, and Ukrainian Orthodox. How has this terrible situation brought Christian brothers and sisters in Christ closer together? That's the first part. Second part, the humanitarian side
of things. You know, many of the churches around here have collected funds and donations, and of course a lot of prayer has been given for peace in Ukraine. What are some of the humanitarian things being done amidst this storm?
Thank you. First of all, in terms of the ecumenical relations or interreligious relations in Ukraine, of course it united people together. However, what is happening right now, it's because of the stance of the Russian Orthodox Church of the Patriarch Kirill in the hierarchy. There have been parishes that juridically belong to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate have been leaving the communion with Moscow for obvious reasons, right? It is, of course, unfortunate simply because, as I said at the beginning, you would expect that the Patriarch of Moscow would be the moral force that could have stopped this madness. Instead, he became one voice with these atrocities. You know, so rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto God what is God's, has completely been wiped out from the Bible's Patriarch Kirill reads. And so that is an unfortunate thing. So that means that these parishes that we used to be in union with the Moscow Patriarchate, they're now switching to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, a relatively newly formed church, Orthodox Church. In terms of the humanitarian crisis, absolutely. I mean, you see 4 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine, 2 million in Poland, and then the rest are dispersed to other European countries, and I think here in the United States as well. The U.S. government was willing to take 100,000 people. I don't know how it's going to work in, de facto. But surely, you need to realize this it's a huge humanitarian crisis. I'm talking about not just thousands of people, millions of people. We need all the support we can get, and not simply because people are trying to look for some kind of, luxurious way of life, but these are the basic needs. These are absolutely basic needs that need to be met. There's still babies being born. It's actually a sign of hope for Ukraine, right? Even under, in the basements, these cold basements, but it's a sign of hope. And, we're praying, by all means we're praying. I wish I could say that the leaders in Ukraine and Russia, religious leaders, could kneel together and pray together for the end of this war. I wish I could say that. Fortunately, I cannot. I'm grateful as a Ukrainian. I'm grateful to all of the aid that Ukraine has been receiving, and it's been a tremendous outpouring of help. But I have my own view of how these things. I'm not a politician or military person or whatever else. I pray and hope, but I also act. I speak. Because, see, all of these discussions today, I don't know if you noticed something, right? There is one word that stands out, deceit. The problem is lies. Allow me also, speaking of the deceit, if I may sidetrack here. Allow me to underline for you, my friends. The problem in the eastern Ukraine was artificially created. This is not a real problem. The problem in Crimea, not a real problem. It was artificially created. Russians wanted in Crimea the naval fleet. They got it.
Can we keep it short, Father, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I just want to make sure. Don't
you.
think somehow that in the east, these evil Ukrainians were, killing Russian-speaking people. This is falsehood. This is a lie.
Right.
Another lie.
Thank you so much. And we have one more question, which is the last question. Do you mind please introducing yourself?
Petro Fedak, Slava Ukrainian. I don't need a microphone, you can tell.
They can't hear you.
I was asked not to make a speech, that's fine, but I do have answers to a lot of the questions that were posed. But I will say, history repeats itself. To not know history, but the question is, I'm bypassing a lot. You're an analyst in the Army, and I've been watching closely in this retreat recently, and I'm thinking, the neutron pause, and you can explain that. Because you know what I'm talking about.
If you want to respond, if you have the option to respond. If you don't want to, that's okay.
No, I just think that it also has bad connotations.
What?
It also has bad connotations to use a neutron bomb, right? It's called a humane nuclear weapon, but it's just as inhumane as any other nuclear weapon.
John, would you explain it kills people, leaves buildings?
Yeah,
Kills
it's
all living creatures.
right. It isn't that horrible. So I don't think that they're going to go that far. Do you? It's possible, but it would make the world be experiencing a revulsion that they haven't had for decades if that were to happen.
I'm looking at the agricultural aspect.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Let me just, we are running out of time. I will leave it for the last comments for panelists and responders, probably myself included. Can we have it 1 minute, please? Just keep it short. Thank you so much. Please, Father Son.
My friends, let us continue praying for the metanoia, for the conversion of hearts of Ukraine's aggressors, not only Russians, unfortunately, more than Russians. And let us pray for the establishment of truth in the world, because we know who lies come from, and we know who the father of truth, is, right? Or who is the truth, right? God himself. Let's pray for the reign of truth in the world, for the conversion of people who want to see others not as brothers and sisters to love, but as enemies to combat. And our hope is still with us. May the Mother of God help us in this endeavor.
Thank you, Brother. Brother John, please.
Have you noticed that a lot of Ukrainians are better Americans than Americans?
Thank you.
Blessed are the peacemakers. Thank you.
We can have comments. We have time. Yeah.
If you're Catholic, give money to Catholic Relief Services.
Thank you. My wife and I belong to a group called Great Decisions. We meet once a month and talk about important subjects. We never come to conclusions. We don't solve the problems in our couple of hours together. We've heard some very trenchant comments today from our panelists, some very good comments and perceptions from many of you, and we haven't solved the problem. But what we have done is opened our minds a little bit more. We've learned a little bit more. We'll go out and try to learn even more, and hopefully take some action to help to mitigate this thing and end this horrific thing. This same book, Great Decisions, there's a quotation at the back end by President Eisenhower, reading, "A people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both." We don't want to lose them. Thank you.
Dr. Jacob, please.
First, I want to thank Ray and all of you for coming tonight. I don't know that coming here in and of itself does something, but it is a first step, and it's important that we be engaged. I'm a person who spends a lot of time teaching about atrocities, teaching about nationalist atrocities, imperial atrocities, and one question that we have to ask ourselves, and that we ask, what were people doing? It's happening now. It's always happening. What are you doing? What are we doing? I think that has to be. We will be teaching this to our children. My predecessors will teach this to their children, and they will ask where you were. Decide where you'd like to be.
Thank you. Dr. Lubomir, please.
You have a comment? No, I'm done.
All right. I will end up with one comment for me. I do believe, actually, wars have destructive outcomes, not only on directly or at the people or on people who are directly involved in these wars, but across countries. And we can feel it here in the U.S. economically or socially. We can feel these destructive outcomes. And I do believe, genuine belief, that a grassroots movements usually is the best thing to fight these things. I know it's an interstate conflict sometimes, but a grassroots raising awareness among people like this is an excellent key for fighting these wars. Thank you everyone for coming. Ray, you have any remarks, please?
When don't I? Do I have any remarks? He's got a sense of humor, doesn't he? Okay. Thank you all again for coming. It's a beautiful turnout. We had a good problem. All the food's just about gone. Sahtain, as we say, double health. And those organizations, I belong to every organization on there. That's why they're on there. Those of you who haven't written a check yet, I'll be hitting you up. Again, that donation jar is back there. It's almost filled up. Please, we take quarters, whatever you have. This kind of stuff's interesting to me. I got an excellent education at YSU. When Dr. Beelen was the chairman, there were 17 professors, and they were excellent. I'd put them with anybody. My little sister brags about going to the University of Michigan and Rutgers, two of the best public schools in the country. But when your professor is on a screen, or a TA teaches you, and he's too busy writing books, you don't get the education that we got at YSU. So I want to thank George, Jacob, and Kieth for making this university, and there are many other graduates here in the room. We got a tremendous education. And what's going on now at the university is a shame. All right, now back to Ukraine. A few weeks ago, and some of you were there in this room, there was a prayer service at St. Peter and Paul Ukrainian Orthodox Church on Bella Vista. A good friend of Father Lubomir was there. He's now the Archbishop of the Ukrainian Church here in the United States, Archbishop Daniel. Right. Yes, very good friends. And, you know, in the Society of St. John Chrysostom, we want to bring the Orthodox and the Catholics together because we feel we have so much in common. That's 2/3 of Christianity right there. But, be that as it may, for the first time in my memory, Orthodox bishop asked a Greek Catholic priest to come up on the altar. I know you're friends, but still, you often don't see this solidarity. But see, these religious politics put aside, because people are dying. And and what really motivated me to do the program was when Archbishop Daniel said, we need to pray for Mr. Putin's soul. He's a child of God. We don't want to see him lost because of that. And the Russian soldiers, who you've heard that don't want to be there, who are barely fighting, some of whom, I don't know if it's propaganda, again, deceit, actually changed sides. Their relatives are being scooped up off the streets of Moscow by the thousands. So war's bad business. I said, a lot of my friends here, we've protested every war. God bless you all for being here. Let's just hope and pray or send good thoughts, whatever it is we can do. And I promise we will do more programs in the future. Fill that jar up. And God bless you all for coming. Be safe going home.